Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late now. Let's get into today's tale. On a family wedding? My mother suddenly screamed. She stole that dress from a homeless shelter. Then everyone turned home and laughed. Wow, desperate much? My fiancé looked horrified and backed away. Then the groom's mother pulled me aside and said, "You're not the first girl he did this to. You don't need to protect me, Mom, I already know." Nora's voice was soft, but her words struck hard. I looked at her across the kitchen. Nora and her face still had the same warm curves from when she was a little girl. But her eyes, those belonged to someone older, someone who had learned to look away. From comfort and into pain without flinching, I just nodded. "So you saw him?" She took a slow breath. "Yeah, with her." It wasn't subtle. The clock above the stove ticked. Outside snow fell quietly against the windows. Inside my world stopped pretending it was intact. I've never been the dramatic type. No screaming matches, no breaking plates, not racking devices, or lipstick. Stained collars. For years, I thought that made me wise, stable. A grown-up Adrian and I had built a quiet life in Stamford, Connecticut, in a colonial-style home with ivy climbing the bricks and 2 oak trees out front that shed gold leaves every October. Like clockwork, he commuted to Greenwich, where he worked in finance. I taught literature until Isla was born, then turned my attention to her and freelance writing. I was content, or maybe just numb. Things didn't fall apart all at once. They never do. It was a slow erosion, like wind over rock at. First, it was the business trips, then the cold shoulder in bed, then the new cologne, earthy and intense. I remember thinking, "That's not what I bought him last Christmas." I asked, of course. "New scent gift from a client," he said. Everything he said I believed until I didn't. The first real doubt came the week of our anniversary. I had planned a weekend away in the Burkers, just the 2 of us. I'd booked the same B&B we stayed at during our honeymoon. I left their reservation on his nightstand with a little note that said, "Let's remember why we started this." He never mentioned it. When I asked, he said he had a meeting in Boston that weekend. "Can't reschedule," he said with a kiss on my forehead. "You're sweet for trying." A week later, I found a crumpled receipt from a boutique hotel in Saratoga Springs. I didn't say anything. Not then. I wasn't ready. Nora came home for Thanksgiving looking distracted. She stayed up late alone and hovered around me like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. I didn't press. I was toast to hiding things myself. It wasn't until Christmas Eve that she finally said it. We were watching old movies, curled up on the couch under a knit blanket. Adrian had gone to bed early. She turned to me and said, "I saw Dad in Burlington. He was with a woman holding her hand." I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to cry, but I didn't, not in front of her. "I know," I said. My voice barely made it out. "You do. I've known for a while." She looked heartbroken, not for herself, for me. That night I sat in Thedan long after everyone had gone to bed. The fire had burned down, but I kept watching the embers like they might tell me what to do. I didn't sleep. The next morning I got up, made coffee, and smiled through breakfast. Adrian read the paper. Nora barely touched her food. No one said anything, but everything had changed. In January, I went to see a lawyer. Her office was downtown, a neat little second-floor space with leather chairs and quiet music playing through invisible speakers. She was younger than me, maybe early 40s, but sharp-eyed and calm. "I haven't filed anything," I told her. "Not yet, I just need to know where I stand." We went through everything. The house, Adrian's retirement, accounts, his salary, my freelance income. I showed her the receipts I'd started collecting, the credit card charges, ton familiar places, the photographs Nora had taken. "You have more than enough," she said, "if you decide to move forward," but I didn't. Not yet. For a few more months, I pretended I cooked dinner. I laughed at his dry jokes. I even folded his laundry. I needed time. Time to let reality settle into my bones. Time to remember who I was without him. When I was younger, I used to think people who stayed in bad marriages were weak. Now I realize it takes strength to hold back until you're truly ready to walk. The breaking point came in March. We were hosting a dinner for some of Adrian's work colleagues. I wore a sapphire blue silk dress he once said he loved. I spent the whole day preparing a meal I knew would impress Duck. confit rosemary potatoes, lemon tart. Nora helped me set the table before she left to stay with a friend for the night. Adrian was in a good mood. Too good. He poured wine with a flourish, told jokes, and played. The charming host, I matched his energy, every smile a mask. After dessert, I stood behind his chair and gently placed an envelope on the table. Adrian, I said, lightly. Remember Saratoga Springs? He blinked. Not sure I do. I turned to his guests. He told me he was in Boston, but this hotel bill says Saratoga, and this picture, well, I think we all know that's not me. His face dropped. One of his colleagues choked on his wine. No one said a word, and then I left the room. The pain. Fallout was quiet. He moved into a condo within the week. Filled his own petition shortly after. He was angry. Not because I found out, but because I embarrassed him. His lawyer tried to fight me for the house, tried to reduce the settlement, but I had everything. The paper trail, the timeline, the photos. My lawyer was surgical. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming something. Dignity, power, maybe even a future. It hot I'd lost. I stayed in the house. The garden bloomed that spring with more color than I remembered. Maybe I just never looked closely before I took long walks to the bookstore downtown, started writing again, and signed up for a pottery class. The silence no longer felt suffocating. I didn't tell many people what happened, just a few close friends. Most assumed we drifted apart. They whispered about midlife crisis or incompatibility. No one mentioned Elise. I didn't care, but I did notice who showed up and who didn't, and I took notes. The weeks after Adrian moved out were strange. Not quite. Not really, but hollow. Like the house itself was adjusting to the missing footsteps. The silence in the mornings, the absence of his car in the driveway. It was as if his leaving left the air heavier instead of lighter, but I didn't cry. I thought I would. I expected grief to wash over me like a tide I couldn't hold back. Instead, it came in strange, dull aches when I passed a side of the bed and saw the pillow untouched, when I pulled 2 mugs out of habit. When I reached for my phone in the evening, forgetting. For a moment, that there was no reason to check in with anyone. People talk about heartbreak, like it's one big shattering. But for me, it was small paper cuts I kept discovering throughout the day. Still, I moved forward in small ways. I cleared his side of the closet. I took my time with it. Methodical and detached, folding his shirts like I was packing up. Someone else's life, I donated most of it. Some things like a wool coat. I bought him in Edinburgh. I threw in a black trash bag and left at the back of the garage. I couldn't explain why. I just couldn't look at it anymore. Nora came home again in April for a long weekend. Her semester was wrapping up and she looked older. Not in a bad way, just more grown. She had that way about her, like she was carefully watching me, always trying to measure how okay I really was. We went to lunch at a little cafe downtown. The sun was out, the tulips along the sidewalk were blooming, and the town felt just alive enough to make me feel like I could blend in with the world. Again, he's still texting me, she said, not looking up from her sandwich. Your dad, I asked, though. Already knew. Yeah, about random things, my car, my schedule, if I've talked to you. I nodded slowly. You don't need to answer if you don't want to. I know, she said, finally looking up. But I feel guilty when I don't. You shouldn't. She toyed with her napkin. He keeps pretending like nothing happened. That's easier than admitting he blew up his whole life, I said. She blinked, surprised by how direct I'd been, but I didn't walk it back. A few days later, I saw Adrian in person for the first time since the dinner party. He came by to pick up some mail and a few things he hadn't taken during his hasty move. I didn't ask if Elise was with him. He looked tired, thinner. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was stress. Or maybe he just realized what it really meant to live without the scaffolding of a marriage he'd once depended on. He stepped into the entryway, barely pasted the threshold. We stood there in silence for a moment. House looks the same, he said. I didn't redecorate just to spite you, if that's what you're thinking. He cracked a dry, humorless smile. I'll just get the keys and go. You know where everything is. He paused before walking toward the study. For what it's worth, I never wanted to hurt you. You just didn't care enough not to. He turned as if to say something else, but thought better of it. After he left, I sat at the dining room table with a cup of cold tea and stared out at the garden I remembered. All the springs we'd spent planting together, him tilling the soil, me planting colors. We'd been so good at building things on the outside, but whenever really tended to what was underneath. The strange part was that even in his betrayal, there were parts of me that missed the version of him I once knew, not out of love, out of habit, like reaching for a light switch in a room you never go into anymore. Over the summer, things began to shift, not drastically, but enough I took on more writing projects. Nothing glamorous: newsletters, 4 nonprofits, a few editing gigs, the occasional grant proposal. But it made me feel useful again. My mind, long dulled by routine and distraction, began to light up in small sparks. I joined a reading group at the library. The first time I walked in, I felt absurd. A middle-aged divorce trying to reclaim a piece of herself. That felt ancient. But the other women were warm, their laughter easy, and none of them asked about Adrian. That show I knew they were my people. One evening, Esau called from Vermont. "Dad told me he's getting married," she said. I didn't say anything. I didn't know if I should tell you. "It's all right, I think they're having a baby." That one landed harder. My breath caught for a second. Well, he always did want a fresh start. I don't think it's really a fresh start. I think it's just a redo. I smiled, though. She couldn't see me. "You're smarter then. Both of us put together." She hesitated. "Are you okay?" "I will be." And I meant it, because while he was repeating old patterns, I was building something new. Not exciting, not flashy, but solid, quiet, honest. I started writing a story. Not about Adrian, not about betrayal, but about a woman who lived alone, in a house where the walls finally stopped whispering someone else's name. And for the first time in years, I didn't write to escape. I wrote to remember who I was before I forgot. By late August, the trees in Stamford were just beginning to change their edges, tipped in copper, teasing the arrival of fall. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning around anyone else's schedule. No dinners to plan around Adrian's late meetings, no silent negotiations around how holidays would be spent, just me and Nora when she was home and the house that no longer felt like it was hiding something. I was learning to love solitude. Not in a romanticized Pinterest quote kind of way, but in a practical, earned way. Like figuring out how to eat dinner at Thedable alone without feeling awkward, or walking into the bedroom without needing the TV to drown out the quiet. People don't talk about how much noise is embedded in a marriage, the clatter of routines, the friction of compromise, the way your identity gets tangled in someone else's daily habits. When that's gone, you don't just get peace, you get space. And space can be terrifying. But space is also where you start to remember what you actually like. One morning, I took the train into Manhattan alone, something I hadn't done in years. There was a time I used to love wandering the Met with no real plan. Just following what caught my eye. I did that again deliberately on a random Wednesday, when the museum was quiet and half empty. I stood in front of a Degas sketch for almost 20 minutes. Not because it was famous or dramatic, but because it was unfinished, just faint lines and shadows of something in progress. And I liked that it didn't need to be done, to be worth something. Afterward, I had lunch at a cafe in the Upper East, side by myself with a book in one hand and a glass of white wine in the other. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I didn't feel brave either. I just felt alive in my own skin. It sounds small, but after years of shrinking around another person's orbit, it felt revolutionary. Later that week, Esau came home for a quick visit. She was in her final year of undergrad and already talking about grad school, possibly abroad. We made dinner together, pasta with lemon and fresh basil from the garden. She still moved through the kitchen the same way she did when she was 13, claiming she didn't know where anything was even, though nothing had moved in years. She talked about school, about her favorite professor, about a boy in her lit class who kept asking if she liked Joan. Didion, or if she just pretended to. Pretended, I asked. He says, everyone just says Didion because it's cool. I scoffed. Didion's been cool for 50 years. She'll outlive him in every way that matters, Nora grinned. That's basically what I told him. It felt easy, thermal. But under the surface, I could tell something was brewing. After dinner, we sat outside on the porch watching the last light fade from the sky. Crickets hummed around us. She was quiet. Her hands curled around, her mug like she was building up to something. Finally, she said it. I think you want to talk to Dad less. I didn't answer right away. It's just, every time we talk, I feel like he's trying to make me forget. Like if we pretend everything's fine, it never happened. I nodded. You don't owe him comfort, I know, but I still feel like the only bridge he has back to this life is through me. I looked at her. Really, looked at her. She carried so much on her shoulders. Too much you don't have to hold the bridge for anyone. She let out a shaky breath. You're not mad, sweetheart. I just want you to be okay. That's all I've ever wanted, and it was true. Adrian emailed me once, in September. A single clipped message about refinancing the house, something he'd apparently meant to address months ago, but had slipped his mind. He ended the email with, "Hope you're well. Not how are you not? I'm sorry. Not I regret what happened. Just, hope you're well." I didn't reply. I printed the email, gave it to my lawyer, and then made a cup of tea and sat in the sunroom for an hour watching the breeze move through the trees. I knew what kind of man he had become, and I knew what kind of woman I was becoming. That was enough. I started going to a Sunday morning yoga class at the community center. Nothing trendy or performative. Just a dozen or so middle-aged women stretching and breathing and trying to remember what their bodies could still do. We didn't talk about our husbands. We didn't talk about our jobs. We just moved and breathed and showed up for ourselves. There was one woman, Mira, who always came in early and stayed late. One morning she asked if I wanted to grab coffee after class. I said, yes, without overthinking it. We talked for 2 hours. She had been divorced for 5 years, 2 grown kids. Her ex was remarried too. Do you ever feel like you wasted all that time? I asked her. She shook her head. No. Because that version of me wouldn't have survived today. I had to go through it to become this. I didn't know if I believed that yet, but I wanted to. There was a night not long after when I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale blue shadows across the floor. I thought about all the versions of myself that had lived in this room. The hopeful newlywed, the exhausted mother, the silent wife, the betrayed woman. I thought about the version that might come next. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel her getting closer. The days start getting shorter. September gave way to October, and I watched the maples in the backyard set fire in slow motion. Amber, crimson, gold. I'd always loved the fall. Something about the letting go, the quiet permission to shed what's no longer needed. It felt more meaningful this year. One Saturday, I found myself cleaning the attic, not out of necessity, just something pushed me up there. The space was dusty, still heavy with years of boxed up lives. I pulled out old holiday decorations, Nora's school projects, photos, and frames we hadn't used in over a decade. Then I found the box marked Adrian. It was mostly junk, old tie scufflinks cards I'd written him over the years, anniversary notes in my handwriting. One had a dried flower pressed into the fold, brittle and delicate like a fossil of something I once believed in. I read one aloud to myself. 20 years, and you still make me laugh like the first week I'd choose you again 100 times. That version of me felt like a stranger. I didn't cry, I didn't get angry. I just put the card back in the envelope and slid the whole box to the far corner of the attic. Let it gather dust again. Maybe one day Isa would want to look through it. Maybe not. I wasn't erasing the past. I was just choosing not to live in it anymore. I saw Elise once by accident. It was early November. I was in town running errands, walking out of the bookstore with a novel tucked under my arm and a pumpkin latte I was pretending to like. She was coming out of the pediatrician's office next door, her belly visibly swollen. She didn't see me. She was laughing at something on her phone. Her hair was perfect, pulled into a sleek ponytail, her coat expensive and spotless. She looked untouched by grief, by consequence, by the weight of what she'd walked into. I wasn't jealous. That surprised me. I wasn't angry either. No, truly, mostly I just felt distant, like she belonged to another lifetime, like we were women on 2 separate planets. who happened to breathe the same air for Amament. I went home and didn't tell anyone I'd seen her. Some things don't need to be shared. Esau came home for Thanksgiving. It was just the two of us. She'd asked if I wanted to invite anyone, a neighbor, maybe a friend from my book group, but I told her no. Wanted something quiet, something that didn't feel like a performance. We cooked together, roasted a small chicken instead of a turkey, made mashed potatoes from scratch. She picked a bottle of wine that she insisted paired well, though I didn't care what. It paired with. We ate by candlelight, laughing over things that didn't matter, occasionally slipping into silence that felt warm, not heavy. Halfway through dinner, she looked at me and said, "I don't think I've ever seen you this. I've ever seen you this." Okay, I smiled. I think I finally am. It wasn't a grand transformation. I hadn't reinvented myself. I hadn't suddenly become someone new. I just started being someone honest, someone whole. But healing isn't linear. That's the part no one tells you. Some mornings, I still woke up with the phantom feeling of him beside. Some nights I still looked at the front door like he might walk through it out of habit. Sometimes I heard a song in the car that pulled a memory to the surface so vividly it took my breath away. But they passed. The moments passed, and they stopped owning me. I met Mira for coffee again in December. It had become a quiet routine. Sundays after yoga, two women with shared battle scars, holding space for each other. She told me she'd been dating again. "Nothing serious," she said, "but it's nice to have someone ask how your day was." I nodded. "I haven't gotten there yet. You will, or maybe you won't. Either way, you're allowed to want more or not." And that was it. No pressure, no advice disguised as encouragement, just space. That night, I pulled out my journal, one I hadn't touched in months. I wrote a single line. "I am not waiting for anyone to give me my life back," and I meant it. December rolled into January, and the new year felt different, not in the way resolutions pretend to promise, but in a quiet internal shift. I no longer flinched when I saw couples holding hands in town. I stopped, reflexively checking my phone in the evenings. I started waking up with a clearer sense of self, not waiting for healing, but living inside of it, and that's when the opportunity came. It started with an email, not from Adrian, not from Elise, from Adrian's firm. The subject line read, "Confidential Ethics and Personal Conduct Review." I blinked twice, reread it, and opened the message. It was formal, laced with legal language, but the core message was clear. The firm was conducting a quiet, internal investigation into employee misconduct. I was being contacted because I was listed as a spouse on legacy documents related to a charitable foundation, something Adrian had set up during our marriage for tax benefits and corporate reputation. My lawyer had warned me during the divorce that the foundation paperwork might rear its head later. "Keep records," she'd said. "Every grant, every expense I had, every receipt, every transfer, every spreadsheet Adrian ever smugly dismissed as your little files, I still had them neatly organized in a folder in my office." He thought I kept them because I was sentimental. He never realized I was preparing for war. I responded to the mail, attached a handful of carefully selected documents. Nothing dramatic, just enough to confirm that yes, I had access, yes, I had knowledge of the spending, and yes, I'd be happy to cooperate fully. Then, I sat back and waited. The fallout began slowly. A few weeks later, I heard through a friend, one of those well-meaning gossip conduits who always starts with, "I probably shouldn't say this," but that Adrian had taken a leave of absence. The kind of absence that has quotation marks around it. There was talk of misused charitable funds, foundation, grants rerouted to personal travel, off-expense accounts flagged with things like dinners for two at boutique hotels. One of those hotels was in Saratoga Springs. Another was in Burlington. It wasn't illegal. Not quite. But it was enough for reputational damage. Enough to trigger a quiet push from the board. Enough for the partners, all image-conscious, legacy-driven men, to lose patience. By February, Adrian was no longer a senior partner. He kept the condo. He kept Elise. But the career, the status, the respect, he wrapped himself in like a bespoke suit. Gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell Nora. I didn't post anything online. I didn't even celebrate with Mira. I just took one afternoon off, made myself a fresh pot off TA, and sat on the porch watching the snow fall in soft layers on the garden. Adrian never cared about, that was enough. That was my revenge measured, quiet total spring. Came early that year. The trees bloomed pink and white, like an apology from the universe. Nora graduated with honors and accepted a scholarship for a research program in Oxford. When she told me she looked nervous, I know it's far, she said. It's the exact right distance, I said, smiling. You go build your life, and I meant it. She hugged Meso tightly. I felt like something in melted and remove itself again. One evening in April, I got a letter in the mail, not a text, not an email. A letter. The handwriting was Adrian's. I recognized it instantly. Blocky precise, always slightly too sharp at the corners. I sat on the edge of the couch, opened it, and read, Clara, I lost a lot more than I thought I would. I underestimated you, and I was wrong. If I could go back, I would do so many things differently. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope someday you can forgive me, or at least think of me without anger. Adrian. I folded the letter once, then again, then slid it back into the envelope and tucked it in the back of a drawer. I never opened. I didn't need to reply. He wasn't writing for me. He was writing for himself, trying to buy peace without having to earn it, but I already had my peace. He had nothing I wanted anymore. In May, I published my novel. It wasn't about Adrian. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about a woman who built her life on the ashes of old dreams and found something better in their place. Not romance, not fame, not wealth, just clarity, freedom. Her own name was spoken, aloud without apology. The reviews were modest but kind. The local bookstore hosted a reading. Nora called me from England, proud and teary. Mira showed up with a bouquet of sunflowers and an annoying smile. Afterward, I walked home alone. The streets of Stamford were quiet, dotted with lamplight and honeysuckle air. I passed the little cafe where I'd once broken down over a text message. I passed the bookstore where I'd once hid from my grief. I passed the corner where Adrian had once picked me up on a rainy night back when we were still pretending to love each other the same way. And then I walked through the front door of my house, my home, my space. And for the first time in years, I felt full, not just okay, not just doing better, whole, and that was the real revenge.